The love of the unknown, robots, for example, and what is capitalism? I wouldn't be surprised if we are converging. There's a bit of an intellectual decline. Remember, when I was young and coming up, Hayek was still alive. Keynes had died only recently. Paul Samuelson was there. They were incredible minds. You don't see that much anymore. We've lost our giants. I don't have an answer to every question you can ask. I always feel I haven't done as much as I ought to do.
Professor Phelps, you added significantly to the modeling of imperfect information and incomplete knowledge to the world of economics. Today, in the big data world, in a way, big data has removed imperfect information. Are we entering into an era in understanding economic inputs where imperfect information will become obsolete?
It's obvious to me that the transition from the industrial age to the information age has some inherent implications for economic growth and human happiness. I realize that the initial consequences of the invasion of robots are a loss of jobs and temporary downward pressure on wage rates. But the fall of wage rates will raise the profitability of investing in many directions, and this investment activity will create more jobs, new jobs. I don't think we're going to be entering into a scary new world in which everything is different and we haven't the slightest idea of how things are going to work.
For a country such as China that is driving massive stimulation in consumption, lowering of the average wage doesn't do any good. So how do you balance the introduction of technology, particularly robotic technologies, and the drive for consumption?
Well, that's a great question. Let me disentangle it. Robots, for example, injection of robots, I believe, generally speaking, will not raise wage rates. They will lower wage rates. But then, important to go beyond that. Because what happens after the wage rates are pushed down? Well, when wage rates are pushed down, that means profit rates are pushed up. And if profit rates are pushed up, what happens? More investment. And if there's more investment, what happens? Wage rates are pulled up. So it's a short-term thing. The depression of wage rates brought about by a wave of robots and all that, AI, that will have a temporary effect on wage rates. The effect on wage rates is only temporary. An analogy is what happened when zillions of people from Europe migrated to the United States. Did they lower wage rates? I bet they did, relative to the growth path. But what then? Well, then we had more investment than we otherwise would have had. And that pulled wages back up so that you don't see any marked decline, any prolonged decline of wage rates in the United States, despite massive innovation into the country. Because investment kept up with the new developments.
You previously said, and I quote, "When I become pessimistic about America, I think about Europe, and then I feel better about my country." So in how much trouble is Europe, and what is your outlook for the United States?
The thesis of my book, Mass Flourishing, published in Chinese by CITIC and in English by Princeton University Press, is that there was a spreading desire in the West, not only to invent and discover, but also to create and innovate. And this desire reached a critical mass in Britain fairly early in the 19th century, and then at mid-century in America, and later in the century in Germany and France. Now we've been witnessing a decline in that desire, continuing first in Britain, then America, and later France. So the deep question on which there's not yet much consensus is what happened to cause that substantial that causes substantial loss of the desire to investment. So the thesis of my book, Dynamism, is that the rise of that desire was the effect of the emergence of a new set of modern values born in the Western Renaissance in Western Europe, and the loss of that desire to create, to innovate, is the effect of the decay of those Renaissance values. And it's not about government policy, really. The problem is not about something wrong in the structure of markets. It's in the people. You can't have amazing growth if you don't have amazing people.
Well, what's wrong with the people, Professor Phelps?
Well, they lost the right values. They don't have any more of the right stuff.
What kind of values should we have at the moment?
The love of the unknown, the love of it's okay to venture into the unknown. It's a little bit scary, but it's worth it. Those attitudes are fundamental to a desire to innovate.
You previously said that from mass flourishing, basically that the Chinese population really embraces innovation in the daily lives.
By the way, I think over the next several decades, we'll be seeing to what degree China has those values. And I think it's very possible that those values are going to come out, going to be shown, going to be seen, and going to exhibit themselves in innovation all over the country. That question is going to be answered in the next 20, 30, 40 years in China.
With all the technological innovations that we have seen in the 21st century so far, the total factor productivity continued to decline, particularly post 2008. What are we missing there?
Lots of the right stuff. We're not innovating enough. For 10 years, we did an awful lot of innovating in Silicon Valley, but Silicon Valley is a small part of the country. The communications information industries are a small part of the gross domestic product. So no matter how spectacularly they perform, the gross domestic product, that doesn't necessarily do very much for the growth of the gross domestic product.
You actually, in your earlier work, modeled that it is rather inequality that represses innovation and creativity. Is a more equal society strongly correlated to an innovative society?
Well, the free market economy, you might say, represents equality in concept. We start equal. There are unequal outcomes. In America, the free market means freedom to enter and freedom to exit. Free market is, in the United States context anyway, basically capitalism. And what is capitalism? Most people don't know even how to define it, but the cognoscenti, the experts, tend to think that capitalism means a system in which, in the firms, the capitalist is king. Everything is done at the behest of the owners. That's the system. It doesn't mean that only owners benefit in the end. In modern Western nations, the government is asked to step in with measures aimed at pulling up low wage rates and financing those subsidies through additional taxes on high wage incomes. Of course, Adam Smith and John Rawls made distinct contributions to a society's thinking, but I do not see that there is any conflict, any contradiction between Adam Smith and John Rawls.
Obviously, one of the signature socialist policies that China has adopted in the current era is this very distinctive drive for poverty elimination in the country, which corresponds in a way to your call to build a more equal society, which prospers innovation. And so in the United States, you have been saying that the income inequality has become an impediment to entrepreneurship and creativity. And so now with Kamala Harris, I noticed a couple of weeks ago, she talked about, it's not about an equal society, it's about an egalitarian society. So are we looking at a possible world where the world's two largest economies are essentially converging on some sort of a quasi-concept where they're meeting somewhere in the middle?
I wouldn't be surprised if we are converging. There's sort of an air of inevitability about that. But how long can we remain very different? It's only my opinion, but I like the idea of, I like the concept of a market economy with a lot of competition, but a lot of redistribution through subsidies for the employment of low-wage labor, not simply to create more jobs, but also in the process to pull up wage rates at the bottom. It seems to me if we have economic justice, then we're all set to go and we can have tremendous competition, and it won't kill somebody to be unemployed for a while, looking around for a better job or one as good as the one he or she lost. Yes, sure, there's some price to pay for such a dynamic system, but it's worth it. And it's fun. It's fun to be participating in creative missions.
One of your lasting contributions you leave in the world of macroeconomics is actually the extension to long-run economic growth model. In the silo model, very fittingly, we explain the inputs of factors, including capital, labor, and total factor productivity. And now, if Phelps were to extend this long-run economic growth model again, how would you fit data into that model?
I think it's important to plug in the values that I was talking about. We have data on those values. In my new book, Dynamism, I and my research team, we show that differences in the dynamism of the economy, looking across countries, the differences in that dynamism can be largely explained by differences in the strength of these important values that I referred to before. You got evidence. So you could plug them into a mathematical model if you want to.
Would that be something you will be working on, maybe for a second Nobel?
Yes, flourishing and the latest book, Dynamism, that says it all. Let somebody else cross the T's and dot the I's.
One of your earlier work states that innovation has a direct correlation, positive correlation to population size. So if that scenario holds true, then China with 1.4 billion people certainly has a demographic advantage. How do you explain that to the United States?
Well, I'm charmed that you would remember that paper called Population Increase, published in a Canadian journal. I don't know when. It's too long ago. But yeah, that's right. More heads, more new ideas. If you look at Robinson Crusoe stuck on his island and ask how fast is his productivity increasing? If you look at how fast his productivity is increasing, well, it's increasing. It's a clever fellow, that guy on the island. But if there had been lots of people on the island contributing lots of ideas, productivity would have been rising a lot faster. Robinson Crusoe had only himself to do innovating. But if there were 100 people, there would be 100 people innovating. And yes, China does have some advantage. I'm not sure how much, but China does have some advantage by having a large number of people intertwined in the economy.
So of the top 10 internet companies in the world today, it's an equal split. 5 are US companies and 5 are Chinese companies. And just a week ago, China launched this antitrust guidelines to essentially tame in the biggest internet giants. And so in the US, there are similar rhetorics, particularly from the progressive side, to break up the technological giants. Is that against or for the spirit of free market competition?
If conducted carefully and with the best intentions, then it's likely most of the time to be a good thing. But rampant interventions into companies, the moment one of them becomes successful, is not a good idea. So one has to find some happy medium. In the United States, we have not had enough antitrust initiatives in the past 10 or 20 years. And now, obviously, that's on the verge of changing. We have 4 or 5 gigantic monopolies now in Silicon Valley, and that has to be addressed. But it's not going to be easy how to disentangle those incredibly complex structures. Google is everywhere, and it's everywhere in some intertwined way.
On subsidies, because post the COVID-19, China has pumped somewhere circa $5 trillion now to infrastructure spending. And so state subsidies is going into the new innovative areas. We know about chip making, new electric vehicle sectors, etc. And so what's your view on state subsidies and the industrial policies? Is it effective?
That's a good question. And I should have a good answer for that. Not sure that I do. In general, I would be cautious about state intervention in the directions of the economy. There's a body of political economic thought that is generally called corporatism. The idea that the economy is kind of like a single human body, and the task is to coordinate the arms and the legs and get everybody going in the same direction. And who chooses the direction? Well, that requires some leader. By the way, that goes back to Mussolini, the very term corporatism, meaning the body, corpore, meaning the body. So nowadays there's an inclination to give a push to some directions, to economies and to some industries, and don't give a push to some others. Now I understand that the China model is not simply a matter of picking some industries because we like them and not others because we don't like them. The idea is to get behind a technological breakthrough, and what's wrong with that? And I guess that's probably right. It makes good sense for China to facilitate and encourage in the new directions that have opened up with the discovery of new technologies. And that's something, by the way, that we don't really have in the United States. And maybe here's a case where the United States should be imitating China.
Do you believe there is a genuine the China model?
Oh, it's there.
It's just.
How do I evaluate it? Well, it's certainly been phenomenally successful so far. That doesn't mean that I wouldn't, if I were Chinese, if I were the Chinese leader, I would probably do a few things differently. But then any Chinese leader would also, became the leader, would also do things differently. The succession of leaders in China over the past 50 years have not been homogeneous. They've not all done the same thing. Every new leader is going to impart his own imprint.
You won the Nobel Prize for Economic Sciences in 2006. So where do you think that the next Nobel Prize winner in your field will come from?
I mean, you caught me. I'm a little bit behind in my reading. And when I was a young person, I read voraciously. And when I'm old, I hardly read at all. I can't afford to read. There are only so many days and years left, and I got to spend my time thinking. And I'm afraid I don't have time to enjoy reading the new ideas of other people. There's been a decline of innovation. I think there's a bit of an intellectual decline in economics also.
Mm.
It seems to me that when I was young, you had giants in the field. Remember, when I was young and coming up, Hayek was still alive. Keynes had died only recently. Paul Samuelson was there. They were incredible minds. You don't see that much anymore. The machines can't produce the new ideas that Hayek and Keynes and Samuelson had. We've lost our giants. That's right. Our discipline has lost its innovators also.
Fascinating. We thank you so much for your time, Professor Phelps.
Thank you for your interesting questions, and lovely to meet both of you. You're very nice.